Hello and welcome to the Bread Baker's Calculator version 2. This is an enhanced version of an earlier release we did where we've added a new feature, I think a very useful one. I'll demonstrate that or describe that to you shortly, as well as extended some of the useful help information on the screen, tools and tips for you as a home baker, bread baker. The purpose of the Bread Baker's Calculator, which I must say is a totally free app. We do not ask for user registration or subscription. It is funded by a series of affiliate type advertising at the bottom of the program. These are links to useful equipment and books which we recommend regardless for a bread baker. But any purchases you make through those, and they go through to Amazon, we receive a small fee for that or a small retainer for that, which we then use to improve the program ongoing. So the purpose of this software, this app, the Bread Baker's Calculator, is help you deal with the question, how much do I need? We look at the flour, the water, yeast, and salt. But we also include a sweetener component, how much honey or sugar as it may be. So it's probably easier for me to demonstrate or to describe the program by showing you the screen. The first thing we start with is how much flour we're dealing with. And this is, in this case, you can see it's 500 grams. That was my last usage. In the main, it will be the white baker's flour, okay, the high protein flour. However, you can substitute a proportion of that for an alternate flour type. And let's just click on that, and you can see there's a number of alternate flour types. And as you choose an alternate flour type and move down the screen, it gives you a bit of recommendation of what you could expect in terms of flavor, and maybe some adjustments you need to think about, extra hydrate, extra water, and so on. We won't do that for now. We'll leave it at wholemeal or whole wheat. There is a percentage for water. So these percentages are sort of well known in the industry. So it's using what we call the baker's percentage. And the way professional bakers work is they work on percentages, and those percentages are expression of the flour. And we have a reference guide right at the end for the different bread types as to what the typical percentages are. Because once you know your percentage for, say, white bread or a crusty French round bread or focaccia, then you can put that into the program and scale it up, scale it down. So that's that section. Now I will jump past the new feature and I'll come back to that because I want to spend a bit of time, but we can use the quick reference menu on the bottom right hand side to jump from one section to another. It's actually one long scrolling list. So if you forget that, you just scroll up and down and you won't get lost. So we'll look at quantities, and this has now calculated the quantities you need. Now they're in grams because most professional bakers work in weights. It's reliable. However, the program does also calculate spoons and cups equivalent. So to give you some idea, I tend to use grams when it comes to flour and water, but when it comes to yeast and salt, I use teaspoons because this is all based around what we call no knead. The style I tend to use is no knead baking, and it's a very forgiving style. And so, yes, you want to be reasonably accurate with your salt and your yeast. And I use instant dry yeast, but you don't have to be absolutely precise on for such a small level of grams measurement. Okay, so that's that section. Let's just work our way down. Now, this will make a little bit more sense to you in a moment because it talked about pre-ferment, and I want to talk about that feature later. But you can see it's listing water at room temperature, instant yeast, fine sea salt, sugar, and so on. And it gives you now, we come into a really powerful part of the program, I think a very useful one for day-to-day baking, is if you decide on 500 grams or 300 grams or 700 or 800 grams of flour, what do you need? What size mixing bowl do you need? A Bannerton or Dutch oven or baking tin? And that's what this program will do, a rough estimate for you. I mean, obviously with things like baking tins, you can have different shapes, but it's trying to give you a guide as to what to look for. Okay. You then come down and you can see you can make your own notes because there may be something special about your kitchen, your oven you'd like to remark. Maybe your oven has to be set to 5 degrees higher than the typical. And then you can email your particular choices, both the yield, any notes you may make to yourself and to family and friends. Okay. Then comes the bread reference section. Now this is a fairly long section now because we've extended it. This is a lot of useful information as a bread baker at home. It's something for you to explore, and I won't do that here today. So what we'll do is we'll jump down to bread types. Now what this is a range of typical bread types. It gives you the baker's percentage, so that's the information we need at the very top of the screen. Gives you a guide. It suggests even time that you'll need to commit to resting it, fermentation or proofing, oven temperatures, oven times, and what sort of equipment you typically use. So we have a sandwich loaf, the crusty round French style, the boule. We have the country loaf, which is one of my favorites, which is a nice, slightly less crusty than the rustic style, but a softer, chewer internal, baguettes, and so on. So that's extremely useful. Now, the section I should mention is coming down to here. This is how the program is funded. There is no compulsion whatsoever to use it. As I said, it's a free app. We do not ask for your name. There is no registration. There's no subscription. But each of these buttons here take you to an appropriate section of Amazon where you can look at equipment, look at books, and if you buy something there, we get a small benefit from that. Okay. I want to now show you, I think, a really useful new feature. So we'll go back up to the home. This is the section we talked about where you type in or use the baker's percentage to determine how much amount you need. This is the new section, pre-ferment options. This gives you the ability or the calculation if you want to increase the complexity of the taste without perhaps going to a sourdough starter. And quite a common thing bakers do, home and professionals, is to do what we call a pre-ferment. And that typically means, in many of them, the flour combined with the water and the yeast. You let that ferment perhaps overnight, for example, depends on which one you've chosen. Then that's mixed in with the remaining flour. So it's only a smaller proportion of your total baking. That just gives an extra complexity. And you can see that the last one I used was Polish. If I click on that, you'll see we support Polish, Bega, Sponge, Tangzhong, which is, just as an aside, is the Japanese pre-ferment that gives that very milky taste that Japanese bread is famous for. So if you took a sandwich loaf and added the Tangzhong into that as a pre-ferment, you end up with a very tasty, almost out of this world bread that you could have at breakfast time. It definitely delights the family. And there's two versions of that. There's the more traditional version of how you do it, and there's not a lot of time difference, but one's easier than the other. Then there's a slightly speedier version. Okay, so that's doing that. Now we'll stay with the Polish. So it's preset, roughly Polish is about 20% of the original, so, and 100% hydration. So Polish is tends to be 1-to-1 yeast to, flour to water. The amount of yeast is like a pinch, a small amount of yeast. And to help you out, if you're not familiar with pre-ferments, I've included a section here which summarizes each pre-ferment. So as you choose Polish, you get one to describe Polish, a Bega, sponge, and so on. And that helps you get into that area, but there's nothing like doing as well as researching. There are some good books around, plenty of YouTube videos around. This is a calculator as a reference program, not so much a tutorial, but I thought it was only fair that you have some heads up in a sense as to what it would mean. Yes, it does make a little bit of extra work, but it does lift your baking activity. So that's the program. I hope it can be a cooking companion. No compulsion to buy anything. No identifying information we're interested in. Amazon would be if you bought from them, of course. We don't capture any. So again, thank you for your time. I'll just return back to home. And I hope this program becomes a companion for, as it is for me. I bake regularly every week and am constantly going back to this program as a quick reference guide. So thank you again, and I very much appreciate your time.